Welcome everyone to another installment of the Spring Environmental Resilience Speaker Series, jointly presented by Indiana University's Integrated Program on the Environment and the Environmental Resilience Institute. I'm Sarah Mincy, Director of the Integrated Program in the Environment, and I'm so pleased you're able to join us today. Both IPE and ERI are founded on the understanding that interdisciplinary learning and research are essential to teach today's scholars and to solve today's problems, not to mention tomorrow's. The natural and social sciences, the humanities, and the arts are all critical and in play as we tackle climate change and the environmental challenges that we're facing. IPE was founded in 2012 by the provost and the leadership of the O'Neill School and the College of Arts and Sciences and the School of Public Health to bring together all of the environmental and sustainability scholarship across the various schools and departments on the Bloomington campus. And ERI was founded in 2017 as a part of the IU Prepared for Environmental Change Grand Challenge. Its mission is to enhance resilience to environmental change in Indiana and beyond by accurately predicting impacts and effectively partnering with communities to implement feasible, equitable, and research-informed solutions. IPE and ERI faculty, staff, and students have worked together to bring us a robust set of speakers this semester, every other Friday at noon. And in 2 weeks, we're going to have Dr. Stuart Pickett, an urban ecologist from the Cary Institute of Ecosystem Studies with us. And then the following week, we're going to have one of our very own, Jackie McDonald Gibson from the School of Public Health. So mark your calendars for these upcoming talks. You'll be able to find information about each of these talks on ERI and IPE's web pages and in the regular newsletters and events notices that our organizations regularly send out. So we encourage you to sign up for these newsletters so you'll get these reminders about upcoming talks as well as other news and events that we publicize. Finally, logistics on how you can engage today with our speaker. Please put questions into the chat as you think of them. We'll monitor those and we'll read those at the end as there's time. And so at long last, I want to introduce today's speaker, Marianne Hitt. Marianne is an advocate and a strategist. She's the National Director of Campaigns at the Sierra Club, where she previously served for a decade as director of the Beyond Coal campaign, recognized as one of the most successful environmental campaigns in history. Working with partners across the nation, the campaign blocked the construction of 200 proposed U.S. coal plants, secured retirement of over half of the existing U.S. coal plants, and helped usher in the clean energy era. She also co-hosts the climate storytelling podcast, No Place Like Home. Marianne was listed in 2015 as one of the Politico 50, Politico's list of the top thinkers, doers, and visionaries transforming American politics. She has made numerous media appearances, including Good Morning America, MSNBC, The New York Times, Washington Post, NPR, and Democracy Now! She was featured in the National Geographic film From the Ashes, which was shown here on campus at IU a few years ago, and the Emmy-winning climate series Years of Living Dangerously. She's a contributor to All We Can Save, a Penguin Random House anthology of essays and poetry by women climate leaders, and it's a book I recommend to everybody. She is also a Public Voices Fellow of the Op-Ed Project in the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. Marianne previously served as the executive director of several grassroots organizations, including Appalachian Voices. She received her Master's of Science in Environmental Studies from the University of Montana and her bachelor's degree in the College Scholars Program at the University of Tennessee, where she later received the 2008 Notable UT Women Award. She grew up in the mountains of East Tennessee and now lives in West Virginia with her family. So Marianne, we're so pleased to have you today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll just turn it over to you now and let you share your screen.
It is a pleasure to be with you all. Hello, friends. It's a real treat. I, of course, have some slides to share, but before I do that, I just want to note that Indiana has a special place in my heart. My dad, who very sadly passed away about a month ago on January 27th, after a long struggle with Parkinson's disease, was from Indiana. And so my dad's whole side of the family is mostly in Indiana, around Indianapolis and Martinsville. And I had some of my early experiences with environmental activism with Heartwood, which is the forest protection organization, grassroots nonprofit that I think was born in Indiana. So place very close to my heart, and a place where the Beyond Coal campaign that I had the great honor of leading for a decade did some really incredible work that I'm excited to share here with you all. And so I will have probably 30 minutes or so of a presentation, and then look forward to your questions. And it's really an honor. It's an honor to be with you all. So let me share my screen. And so as you heard, again, I have been the director of the Beyond Coal campaign for a decade, and I am now the national director of all of our campaigns at the Sierra Club. And so what I want to talk to you all about is that work, the progress that we have made in the country so far to move beyond coal and increasingly beyond fracked gas, and the road ahead to continue to make that progress in this very critical decade for our climate. And so my agenda that I have for us here is just to tell you a little bit about the Sierra Club. I assume you're all somewhat familiar with it, but I don't want to take that for granted. To share the progress of the Beyond Coal campaign, and then really focus on what's next as we accelerate clean energy and a just transition, as well as a global phase out of coal. So just briefly, a couple slides about the Sierra Club. We are a national grassroots organization. I believe we are the only national environmental organization where the board of directors is elected by the membership. And then we have chapters in every state. We have 64 chapters, so every state plus several cities have a chapter or a group. And the leadership of those chapters is also elected by the members of the Sierra Club in that state. So wherever you are, including in Indiana, there is an active Sierra Club with lots of volunteers, close to 4 million now volunteers, members, and folks who are involved with the Sierra Club. And we not only have that big reach and that grassroots foundation, but we also have deep expertise, a lot of experienced attorneys, lobbyists, campaigners, organizers with access to key decision makers, and also access to lots of important community partners. And the many, many organizations out there that Sierra Club partners with are a key part of all of our work. And we are currently working toward these very high level goals in the organization, which is to get the electric sector shifted to 100% clean energy by 2030 and reduce oil use as well dramatically, to shift our economy in ways that address racial and economic inequity, to protect 30% of our natural ecosystems by 2030 and 50% by 2050. Make sure everyone has access to the outdoors, the opportunity to explore and enjoy nature, and then continue to mobilize and expand this incredible base of supporters that we have, who are really the engine of everything that we do in the Sierra Club, along with our many partners. And so the Beyond Coal campaign has been a cornerstone of our work here at the Sierra Club for a decade, for a couple of reasons. I came to the Sierra Club because of the image that you see on the left, mountaintop removal coal mining, which is this very devastating form of coal mining, as you can see, where the entire mountaintops are blown up and shoveled into the valleys below, not only devastating our incredibly rich and diverse Appalachian forests, but also causing a lot of harm and health problems and economic devastation to the communities all around them. And I was, as you heard, the director of a smaller nonprofit called Appalachian Voices for several years. And while I was working there, we were trying to stop this form of mining called mountaintop removal. And as we were doing that, there was a proposal for a new coal-fired power plant in Southwest Virginia, in the heart of mountaintop removal country, that we saw as a threat, because if this new coal plant was built, we thought it would be even harder to stop mountaintop removal, because there would be a coal-fired power plant there that would create decades of demand for more of that coal. So we started working to stop this one new coal-fired power plant, only to discover it was one of over 200 that were proposed in the United States during the George W. Bush years. And there were people in every community where these new coal plants were proposed, having them pop up in their backyards, who were trying to fight back. And people were fighting back for a lot of reasons because of course, of the devastating impacts of mining that I mentioned, but also air pollution. Existing coal plants at that time were our country's single biggest source of the sulfur dioxide pollution that contributes to heart attacks and strokes, and also our single biggest source of mercury pollution, which goes from the smokestacks, falls into the water, gets into the aquatic ecosystem, and ends up in the seafood that we eat. And if you're pregnant, you're told not to eat certain fish because of the high mercury levels that they accumulate, which threatens the babies as they're developing and puts them at risk of lifelong developmental problems. So coal plants were also our single biggest source of that mercury pollution, single biggest source of toxic water pollution, and unknown to many folks, but they release a huge amount of toxic water pollution out of their tailpipes. And finally, again, at that time, a decade ago, our single biggest source of the pollution that's causing the climate crisis. So very big polluting source of energy, and we had an alternative, wind, solar, renewable energy that could provide the same services and do it without creating all that pollution. So I joined the Sierra Club when I realized that not only was there this one new coal plant that was proposed in the United States, but there were 200. And the Sierra Club was part of a network of partners that were trying to fight them all on a very shoestring, scrappy budget, but lots of folks who were being creative and putting their shoulder to the wheel in their communities because they did not want these huge industrial facilities in their backyards. So I joined the Sierra Club. For several years, we worked to stop these new coal plants, including some in Indiana. We ended up stopping, again, not just the Sierra Club, but over 300 partner organizations ultimately. We stopped over 200 new coal plants from being built in the United States. And had those been built, they would have been, it would have meant game over for our climate. We would have been locked into another 50 plus years of our most climate harming energy source, but it also would have blocked out new markets for the clean energy boom that we are now experiencing. So we stopped those coal plants, and we had in the process learned a lot about how decisions get made about electricity. And we learned they're primarily made in states and cities because that's where the decision points are for the fate of coal plants and other energy projects. And that was a place where over time we could learn a lot, we could make our voice heard, and we could actually affect those decisions. So then we turned from stopping all those new coal plants to the existing energy system in the United States, which at that time was 530 existing coal plants. So here we are in that work today. So what you see here on the vertical axis is the coal capacity in megawatts, which is, for those who are not energy nerds, that's an amount of energy generation. It goes from kilowatt to 1,000 of those is a megawatt to 1,000 of those is a gigawatt. And then over time, you see on the horizontal axis there in time. And 2010, we embarked on this work to retire the existing coal plants in the United States. And if you fast forward to today, we are 2/3 of the way there. We have 339 coal plants announced to retire in the United States. We have 191 remaining. What you see here in dark blue are the ones that are actually no longer operating. The light blue are ones that have a retirement date before 2030, but have not yet hit that retirement date. And then the red, you see that goal that we, about every 3 years, we looked at the coal fleet and set a goal for the retirements that we thought we could win through our advocacy. And the latest goal we had set in 2020 was 169,000 megawatts. And we actually exceeded that goal slightly in 2020. It was actually the biggest year ever for moving beyond coal in the United States. So we now have 2/3 of the coal plants in the United States announced to retire. And we've cut in half the carbon pollution, the climate warming pollution from the coal fleet in the United States. And now instead of getting half of our electricity from coal, we're getting about 20% of our electricity from coal. And that has been the single biggest engine driving down our climate emissions in the United States. And that has also had big public health benefits. So this is the cumulative benefits over a decade of almost 30,000 lives saved, almost 500,000 asthma attacks prevented, almost 50,000 heart attacks prevented, and $53 billion in healthcare costs saved. And I think when you think about an issue that can be polarizing, like climate change, that is not always everybody's first kitchen table conversation, the very real health harms of coal plants and of other fossil fuels are sometimes more clear benefit and a more clear starting place for folks to understand the need to move beyond fossil fuels to clean energy. Their advocacy played a very big role in this work. And there's actually just a new study that just came out from UC Boulder that found that the single biggest factor in the retirements of the coal plants that they looked at over 200, was the work of the Beyond Coal campaign, which again is Sierra Club has played a big role, but it's over 300 partner organizations, including some partners right there in Indiana. So what this slide shows you, the vertical axis is gigawatts of coal projected to retire. The horizontal axis, all those gray bars that you see are different industry analysts or government analysts that do these projections with vast amounts of industry data, and Synapse, Navigant, et cetera. And you can see that they were projecting by 2030, in the gray, anywhere between like 40 and close to 80 gigawatts would retire by 2030. If you look at the green bar, you can see in the dark, that is what had retired by 2019. The light green, those are things that with locked in retirement dates. So basically we have already exceeded all of the projections of all of these experts. And our goal that we're working towards currently, you can see here of the 140 gigawatts is also one that we are, as you saw on the prior slide, that is at hand. And so the main takeaway of the slide that I want to hopefully share with you with a little data to back it up, including here and from this recent UC Boulder study, is that advocacy actually plays a pivotal role. And we created a model of the United States fleet of coal plants back in 2010 to figure out which ones should we really look at as most vulnerable for retirement based on how old they were, what pollution controls they had, the political landscape around them, and then have been using and refining that over the years. And the one thing that we would always say is that we have an advocacy dial on our model, which none of these other experts have. So they're looking at the economics, they're looking at the energy markets, but we are looking at the advocacy community, and we're looking at the clean air impacts and the clean water impacts and the network of advocates in that place that we know are committed to working towards 100% clean energy and climate justice and environmental justice. And that is why our predictions of where the coal fleet is headed have consistently been more accurate than the likes of these folks, Goldman Sachs, many more, because we understand the role of advocacy in our work. And just a couple, this is just a couple of key points about how we have done this work, a little bit of a deeper dive into the strategy of our advocacy. So the first has been really forcing polluters to pay the full costs of their pollution. Again, I mentioned the mercury, the sulfur dioxide. There were all these loopholes for all of that pollution when President Obama came into office. There were, for example, no standards at all for mercury pollution from coal plants in the United States. And those mercury standards were put in place. That required then these coal utilities to make a decision about whether to invest in these plants to clean up the mercury pollution or to just retire them instead. And so making sure we're implementing those, that we're holding them accountable for when they're violating those standards and prioritizing those in places with a high burden on communities of color. That has been one pathway. Another has been to level the playing field. This is making the case that clean energy can do the same job as coal and to do that more cheaply. And that has something that has really, I'll talk about that more later, but that is something that has been an increasing wind at our back because renewable energy is now cheaper than coal in almost all parts of the country. And so we now, and there in Indiana, you have one of the great examples in NIPSCO, which I'll talk about later. But cracking down on utilities that keep running their coal plants even when they're more expensive than clean energy alternatives. And then 3 is easing this transition as we make it. So I live in West Virginia. I know Indiana is a coal mining state. We are a coal mining state. We very much care about and are putting our shoulder to the wheels around transition for workers and communities and home to coal plants and coal mines. So that includes trying to push the federal government to release the resources that are needed, to advocating for that in our work. And then lastly, federal strategies. So that includes what I mentioned before, making sure our air and water standards are strong and enforced, pushing for support around coal mining transition that needs to come from the federal level, and really, looking at the places in like electric co-ops that get a lot of funding from the Rural Utility Service, where the federal government plays kind of an outsized role in how energy is financed. So it's a lot to take in, I know, but just offering this to kind of give you a sense of the depth of the strategies that we have refined and honed and developed in this campaign over a decade. And it's resulted in a lot of victories, and here are just a couple recent ones to just kind of give you a snapshot. The top here, you see someone wiping their hand down a playground slide and coming up covered in coal ash. This is the South Oak Creek plant in Wisconsin that was of big concern to the local community. After a 3-year campaign, it announced retirement, and the utility also committed to replace it with no new gas, which is another polluting fossil fuel, but with solar, wind, and storage. And so this is a recent coal plant retirement that was of a big concern to the community and is going to be replaced with clean energy solutions. And then at the bottom, you see an example from Ohio and Illinois, which is a utility called Vistra, that announced the single biggest coal plant retirement, made the single biggest coal plant retirement in US history. They announced plants number 3, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 6 coal plants, and cited the coal ash and water toxics pollution as reasons that they were going to retire these plants because of the costs of dealing with that pollution, and announced, again, major clean energy investments to replace that coal power. And then in Maryland, Talon Energy announced a couple of plants, 3 plants, Brandon Shores, Wagner, and Montour would retire, again, because of this, in this case, because of a lot of air pollution. And both of those included big just transition and sizable clean energy investments as part of the pathway for retirement for those plants. So a lot of progress, a lot of momentum. And when we look ahead, the priorities include accelerating clean energy and just transition, and a global coal phase out. And that includes, making sure we're not, we're leapfrogging over gas as we move beyond coal. So here, a couple key opportunities as we look forward around coal. One is around the economics, because again, clean energy is now cheaper than coal in almost all parts of the country. So making sure that utilities are disclosing that and addressing that and actually accounting for it as they make decisions about the future of their coal plants. Looking at different opportunities in the states, in the Northeast, there's a lot of opportunities around regional commitments on climate change. Similarly, in the West, a lot of climate leadership where we want to focus on. And in the Midwest and the Southeast, there are a lot of, one of the interesting opportunities around electric co-ops and looking at long-term contracts they have with coal plants and how we could maybe accelerate them exiting those. And then at the federal policy level, obviously, we have a Biden administration that is committed to environmental justice, committed to climate action, and getting the Biden administration to really make sure that we're holding these polluters accountable, making sure that these coal plants don't continue to harm communities and that we're actually mapping out a robust just transition for coal communities. And as we look ahead, this is the threshold that the threshold moment we have arrived at. We have, as you can see here, the vertical axis there is how much electricity we're getting from coal. The horizontal axis is time, and the brown line is coal coming down, and the green line is renewable energy coming up. And in April of last year, we got more electricity in the US from renewable energy than from coal for the first time ever. We're on track, either looking back to 2020 or definitely in 2021, to achieve that over an annual basis. And we had the biggest years ever last year for wind and solar, and have had lots of states passing 100% clean energy standards. And so this is momentum a decade ago for clean energy that frankly we did not have at our backs. The economics of clean energy were not at our backs, but they now are. And here we have, I'm just gonna, I have a little toolbar here that's blocking my view of the slide. So I'm just gonna move that around, pardon me. So we have 30 now. This is speaking to the places committed to clean energy. 30% of the U.S. population committed, living in places committed to clean energy. So again, the vertical axis there is percent of U.S. population that has made a commitment, a city commitment, a state commitment to 100% clean energy over time. And you can see there on the right, it's a third of the U.S. population, 165 cities. 13 counties, 8 states, Puerto Rico, the District of Columbia, and states that have passed binding 100% clean energy legislation that requires they get to 100% include California, New Mexico, Nevada, Washington, New York, Maine, and more. So Virginia, if I didn't mention Virginia. So again, more wind at the back of clean energy. And there's a lot of, okay. And then there's, as we're looking at that momentum, there's a lot of key opportunities to seize on clean energy. Holding utilities accountable that are making big promises for 2050, but potentially not acting on them this decade. I'll talk more about that in a minute, especially at the lay of the land in Indiana. Looking at the rules of the road for our energy markets, which have definitely come into scrutiny with all the blackouts in Texas, and making sure those rules of the road are reinforcing clean energy, resilience, environmental justice, and not just prioritizing fossil fuels that, as we saw in Texas, if not properly regulated, can't necessarily keep the lights on and do it affordably. State opportunities to keep building on that state level progress and those commitments. And then at the federal level, we've got lots of great leaders coming into the Biden administration who are going to make sure we're seizing every opportunity we can to accelerate clean energy. And there is a 100% clean energy standard in moving in Congress that would be a real game changer were we to get that over the finish line. And just a couple of key victories to kind of bring this home. Last year, Virginia became the 8th state in the country to pass. You can see it, that's a picture there from Richmond, Virginia. I was actually there on that day. It was one of the last gatherings we had before COVID shut everyone down there in Richmond on the Capitol steps. And that bill passed, and now Virginia has a 100% clean energy commitment, and we're pursuing them in many other states. And then at the utility level, this is an example of PNM, which was looking for new energy sources, and this is a thing that happens a lot. We really pushed for them to make sure they were really looking at all sources and not just looking at coal and not just looking at gas, but really opening the door for clean energy to bid for their new energy that they needed, and resulted in a winning bid with 650 megawatts of solar and 300 of batteries, and $1 billion in new investments within districts that are going to be impacted by the closure of the San Juan coal plant. And I will just keep moving here. So this is a last piece of this I want to really flag is the threat of new gas. And we obviously have had a significant amount of new fracked gas come on the market to replace some of this coal, which is not the pathway to solving our climate problems, because it is also a potent greenhouse gas. And it also comes with its own set of health and environmental problems, including all of the local pollution and water contamination caused by fracking, the creation of pipelines to move this stuff around that harms communities. And then the reality that, again, this is a very, very potent greenhouse gas. So you can see here, there's 108 gigawatts of new gas on the drawing board. The yellow shows what's under construction. The brownish are things that have been delayed. And then the orange ones are ones that are kind of on the drawing board to date. And so we have kicked off some work to stop those. And one of the key arguments that we're using is, and here's an example from Indiana, is that solar and wind are actually cheaper than both coal and gas and can do the job. And so what you see here on this chart on the left is a case study from Indiana where we looked at the price of electricity to meet the state's needs, and existing coal was coming in at $39 a megawatt hour, which is a unit, how much it costs to provide a megawatt of electricity over an hour. New gas came in even more expensive at $42 a megawatt hour. New wind came in at $29 a megawatt hour, and new solar came in at $37 a megawatt hour. So you can see that both the new solar is just slightly more expensive than existing coal, but cheaper than new gas. And new wind was cheaper than both existing coal and new gas. And this is, we believe, a conservative estimate in that, like, actually the meaning that the gas is likely more expensive than this. And there's a study out from Rocky Mountain Institute that found that a portfolio of clean energy solutions could provide all of the same services as a new gas plant, including keeping the grid stable, keeping the lights on, for either equal cost or less cost than a new gas plant in just about every part of the country. And so these are the economics that we are looking at to make the case that utilities should not be investing in a lot of new gas to replace their coal plants, but should be moving forward to a suite of clean energy solutions. And a couple of highlights of that work. This is folks in Los Angeles, in a community of color living around a gas plant, which you can see there clearly giving down the thumbs down to some of our young leaders. One thing about gas that's different from coal is that coal is primarily used in the US in the electric sector. A little bit of it is used to make steel. Gas is used about a third in the electric sector, a third in different industrial applications, and a third in buildings for heating and cooking. And so tackling gas is a bigger, more complicated effort. And this is a piece of that at the Sierra Club, but we have had progress as we've been ramping up this work, stopping over 6 gigawatts of gas and then slowing or shrinking another 2 gigawatts of gas that was on the drawing board. And we now have about a third of the gas on the drawing board nationwide that is either in a delay or has been pulled back. And so just a couple of the opportunities there for this work looking ahead. Again, one is looking at some of these, sorry for all the acronyms in here, but looking at some of the regional energy markets and trying to push them to stop incentivizing new gas, which they currently do. Again, in the West, where we have a lot of climate commitments, really tying those climate commitments to new gas and making it clear that this is not a climate solution. Midwest, East, there's a lot of, as you saw in a couple of examples, if the gas is never proposed in the first place, that's really the ideal outcome. And so trying to put forward a suite of clean energy solutions so that the gas isn't proposed in the first place. At the federal level, there's some opportunities around just, again, holding the polluters accountable for the pollution from the gas plants and from fracking. And then something we call revoking the social license. I think a lot of people view gas as clean. That's what our polling has shown us. And there's, just as one example, recent studies out that show that using a gas stove in your home creates levels of air pollution that would be illegal outdoors, but people are not aware of this. And this is medical research from, esteemed researchers and universities. But most people are not aware of that because there is a public perception that natural gas is quote unquote natural and that it's clean and it's safe to use inside your home. And so trying to shift that narrative and get the word out about the real public health and climate costs of gas is another key piece of our work. And a couple of key victories I would mention as we head here towards the end of our slides. One in New Mexico, there was a proposed gas replacement for the San Juan coal plant, which I mentioned, that is on its way to retirement, that we defeated and instead got a commitment to replace the plant with 100% solar and storage that will be built in the communities that will be impacted by the closure of that coal plant. So they will get the economic benefits of that clean energy. And then, as I mentioned, challenging the new gas before it has a name, before it's a specific plant. But one example, in North Carolina, Duke had big plans to build a lot of gas. We pushed back very hard on those and they shrunk those plans significantly, so more work to do. But in Arizona, a couple of utilities there, Tucson Electric Power has committed to replacing all their coal with a combination of energy, renewable energy storage and efficiency, and no new gas. And Arizona Public Service also has no new gas in their 5-year action plan compared to having 5 gigawatts of new gas in their plan in 2017. So just a couple last slides here to kind of map out the big picture of what's ahead and what the opportunities are. So this is a report that we just released in January, and I have some Indiana specific highlights for you about how our electric utilities, which I think we all are, after what we all saw unfold in Texas, I think a little more painfully aware of just how reliant we all are on our electric utilities. and whether or not they are on track to just meet their own commitments that they have set to tackle the climate crisis and move towards clean energy. And so all these utilities have set net zero or 100% or some sort of goal for 2050. And so we looked at three things you can see on the bottom. Are they going to retire their coal by 2030, which the climate science is clear we must do? Are they building new gas, and are they building or adding new clean energy at the scale that's needed? And we gave them all a grade. And again, this is just measuring them against their own commitments. And Indiana, one of our analysts who put this report together, described Indiana as being at the crossroads, because you literally have a utility that got every single grade. So you have NIPSCO, which got an A, got a score of 82 out of 100. You have Vectren in Indiana, which got a grade of B. They got 50 out of 100. I&M, Indiana Michigan Power, got a grade of C. They got a 44. IPL, Indianapolis Power and Light, got a grade of D, got 30 points out of 100. And Duke, Indiana, got an F. They got 13 points out of 100. And so we released this report to really, again, make it clear the distance that some of these utilities have to go, and the long gap between their words and their actions in a lot of places. And you have got quite a spectrum there in Indiana. And so as we look ahead, two last pieces, and I'm going to close with an Indiana slide, but this is a picture of myself, Bruce Nilles, who founded the campaign, and our volunteer leader, Verena Owen from Wisconsin area. She lives in Illinois, but somehow she's our Wisconsin team she's in there in my mind. Anyway, this is a picture of us in 2017 at the Bonn climate talks, UN climate talks, for the launch of Europe Beyond Coal. And in 2017, Europe Beyond Coal launched as a sister campaign to the US Beyond Coal campaign. And there are now Beyond Coal campaigns in South Korea, Japan, and Australia. And then there's an even bigger network of advocates in China, in India, Vietnam, Chile, Kenya, folks all over the world who are working globally to move beyond coal. And this really has become a global movement. The European campaign has made similar progress to ours in the United States, and the others are not far behind. And I do think that this decade, it is possible that we will actually, for sure in the US, we will, I think, reach the end of the era of coal. But I think in a lot of countries around the world, we will hit the same targets. And here in Indiana, the work will most definitely continue. And some of the highlights to date, again, I mentioned NIPSCO. So NIPSCO made a big commitment a couple of years ago to retire all of its existing coal and solicited bids for clean energy to replace it. And the bids that they got in were far cheaper than just continuing to run their existing coal plants. And so they're now proceeding with trying to acquire this clean energy that will save customers billions of dollars while phasing out their coal plants and replacing them with clean energy. So ensuring a just transition in those communities and continuing to support that transition is one of our highlights. But Indiana remains home to 5 super polluter coal plants, some of the biggest polluting coal plants in the country. The Weather Channel did, if you ever want to Google it up, did a series on this. And all of those but one have been announced for retirement, and we're remaining focused on the rest. So those are some of the highlights for Indiana. And as we look ahead, I mentioned Duke Energy being the utility with an F grade. We are taking them on in a coordinated campaign across Duke's entire footprint, which includes other states, including their headquarters in North Carolina. We're pushing back on plans in Indiana to build new gas plants, and we're prioritizing making sure clean energy continues to grow, including new projects in communities that have been historically burdened by fossil fuel pollution. And one last little thing here. I asked my team here to get me some stats about Indiana that I will quickly read for you, because I forgot to get them at my fingertips on time. I'm like a person turning in their homework late. So Indiana has had 22 coal plants retired or slated to retire. That is preventing over 200 deaths 1,400 heart attacks and 15,000 asthma attacks. Oops, I'm sorry, typo, 900 lives saved. So 900 lives saved, preventing over 1,400 heart attacks and 15,000 asthma attacks. And there are 22 plants retired and 9 coal plants remaining. So I think that is it for my slides, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There I am marching down the streets of Philadelphia just to give a flavor of the work on the ground that makes these things happen. And I will stop sharing, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Wow, Marianne, thank you so much. What a great talk, and what an amazing job you've been doing, you and your team. I was just rereading your chapter in All We Can Save this past week, thinking about your visit with us. And you say in there that there's this thing called a false summit, when you're climbing a mountain and it looks like you're finally summiting, but you actually have further to go. And you're very humble to say that that's how you feel about your work, because it seems like you really have reached an amazing summit. So thank you for all you're doing. We have a lot of questions, and so I'm going to just jump right into them.
Great. I'm remiss. I wrote down Wendy Breadhold. She's our Indiana campaign director for Beyond Coal. And I wrote down to myself, make sure you mention Wendy, as I'm sure probably lots of you know her, but as one of our key leaders in this work, and somebody y'all should definitely connect with on social media and in real life if you want to be part of this work.
That's good to know. Yes, thanks. So one of the first questions that came in was related to the pandemic, actually. Do you see any link between the pandemic and the best year for coal plant retirement in 2020? Not to belittle your efforts, but how else do you see pandemic responses helping or hurting climate work in general?
Well, I think one thing we did see in the pandemic that electricity demand obviously dropped for a while, and coal plants faced the biggest uphill battle because they are the most expensive at this point. And so because coal plants are the most expensive, if you're an electric utility facing a slimmer prospects, then the coal plants were the first that they were looking at to retire as the economy slowed down. So I do think that was potentially part of it. But these are long range business decisions that are made by these utilities, so they're not necessarily going to sort of do that at the drop of a hat. But I'm sure it was a factor. I think the other big factor that we saw was an increasing awareness of the connections between pollution and public health and environmental justice, and the research that came out that showed people living in areas with high particulate matter were more likely to get sicker from COVID and more likely to die from COVID than people in areas with less chronic air pollution. And people living in areas with chronic pollution are more often communities of color. And historically, these coal plants have been a very big source of that pollution. And so I think that was another, connecting those dots was something else that has happened during COVID that has shifted how people are thinking about these choices going forward.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We have a couple questions that are kind of related to storage, energy storage issues. So one is, I've heard that one of the most attractive aspects of fossil fuels as an energy source for industrialized society is how conveniently they store energy. Can you talk about what strategies are being developed for storing enough energy from renewable sources like large scale? Is this a sticking point in post-fossil fuel advocacy?
This is one of the areas of the most rapid innovation in the energy world. And there is, if you want to be nerdy about it, you can Google Rocky Mountain Institute's clean energy portfolios, because they did, plant by plant, went around to all these proposed new gas plants in the United States and compared, and also some existing coal plants, and showed the portfolio of clean energy solutions that could provide the same services. And storage is a big part of that. And NIPSCO that I mentioned earlier, when they put out their bids for energy to replace their coal plants, the winning bids were a lot of solar and energy storage and some wind. And so energy storage is definitely a mature technology. It's definitely ready to not only, keep the lights on and do that at the scale that's needed, but also to do so economically. Now, I'm not an engineer, and so if anybody wants to get into the engineering parts of, of the mechanics of how it works, you would probably have to do some Googling yourself on that, because I'm less of an expert on that. But some states, California actually has set a pretty high target in its clean energy standard for renewable energy storage. And those kind of targets tend to drive a lot of innovation, because it's a big economic opportunity that folks are racing to meet. And so it's, and the woman who is the head of the Energy Storage Association, Kelly Speaks Bachman, is now in the Biden administration. And I forget which agency she's in, but they have tapped her for an important role, either at DOE or maybe CEQ. So there's quite a lot of activity there. And it's, I think, a lot farther along technologically and economically than a lot of folks realize. It's been moving very fast.
And this is, I think, fairly related, because I think reliability really has to do with storage of energy. But the question is, there are countries with less sun and wind using more renewable energy, and traditional utilities also failed in the recent Texas instance. The argument is still made, though, that coal is more reliable. What are some of the arguments that you have found to be effective when it comes to the reliability of renewables?
Yes, well, a couple of things. One is we do have this very big interconnected electricity grid. And so Texas is a little bit of a different situation, obviously, because they made a decision not to connect themselves to any other electric grids, so that they would not have to be regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So by creating their own electric utility grid that is cut off from the rest of the country, I think you can see that when things get extreme, they have fewer options. But most of our electricity grid does not operate that way. So in the PJM grid that covers a lot of the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic is a huge electric grid with lots of opportunity to turn things on and off when they're needed, and make sure things stay stable. So that's one piece, is the just how much flexibility there is on most of our electric grid. The other thing to note is that a lot of what we've seen in Texas and in California in the grid failures has actually been fossil fuel plants failing. So in Texas, it was so cold that a lot of the coal and gas plants were the ones that actually failed. They failed at a much higher rate than wind, because they couldn't move the gas around, because there were valves and other parts of the hardware at the plants that literally wouldn't work because it was frozen, because they didn't adequately invest in sort of weatherizing that infrastructure. A lot of times when we have extremely cold weather at coal plants, the piles of coal will freeze so solidly that they can't be used. So while, yes, those things can be reliable in ideal conditions, but they also can fail us when we need them most. And that is where, having a mix of wind and solar and storage, especially the more distributed, the better that you can have in the system. People having solar panels and batteries in their own houses, using electric vehicles as kind of a backup battery for your house or for the grid. I mean, these are all things that are possible now that actually can give us a more sustainable and more reliable electricity grid. And I think we'll see a lot more progress toward that. And, I think events like we've had with big outages in California and Texas, sadly, there's a lot of political finger pointing around, always wanting to blame renewables, because I think that is argument that people are sort of subject to. But I think the reality is that it is often, in these extreme events, has been the fossil fuel plants that have failed. And that's what's caused the big sort of catastrophic failures.
Mm-hmm. Another question related, I think, to that, ironically, is, can you talk a little bit about the strategies of coal interest organizations like Energy Policy Network? Where do you see them being most successful? And relatedly, can you talk a little bit about Powder River Basin coal production? I'm curious to hear about the lay of the land regarding the power players that are working to keep coal plants going.
Yes, one of the things that is an indicator of just how much things have changed is when I came to the Sierra Club in 2008, it was when we were trying to pass climate legislation in the United States Senate, which we came very close to doing, but did not succeed. And the main reason we failed was because of the coal industry and because of the coal lobby. We had at that time Senator Byrd and Senator Rockefeller in office. And we had this very powerful lobby called the American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity that was running ads all over the country, had plastered Washington with billboards and signs. And the American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity no longer exists. They do not exist as a lobbying enterprise. And we have seen both the biggest coal mining companies in this country, Arch Coal and Peabody Coal, declare bankruptcy, really struggle financially quarter after quarter. And now in the Powder River Basin, you have big coal companies like Arch that are explicitly and very publicly saying they're looking for their exit strategy, that they, and one of the things about coal in the United States is we only export a little bit of it, and most of what we export is for making steel. And there was a big push in the middle of the last decade to build 6 new coal export terminals in the Northwest that were intended to take Powder River Basin coal over to Asia. It was never clear that the economics were going to pencil out because coal is a big heavy rock and you move it across the whole ocean, and you have to have someone willing to pay a premium for it to make that economically worthwhile. But there was huge grassroots opposition to those facilities in these Oregon and Washington port communities. So they were all stopped. All of these coal export terminals were stopped. And so for the Powder River Basin, they're just looking at a dwindling market for their product because all the coal plants in the United States are just continuing to retire. They don't have really any other customers for their coal, which is not coal for making steel. It's just coal for power plants. And so there is a wind down happening there, but there is also, as we have here in West Virginia, in states that have long ties to coal mining in particular, they're politically willing to do almost anything to try to salvage the industry. And it often comes at the cost of the taxpayers in that state. It comes at the cost of public health in that state. I think West Virginia and Wyoming are going to probably hold on to their coal plants longer. And while that may make sense to them to keep coal mines running, it's also going to saddle people in these very poor states with some of the most expensive electricity in the country. So I heard that this year in the legislature, in Wyoming, there's some move to somehow try to punish other states that are refusing to buy their coal power in some way, which I don't think they actually have the authority to do. So we'll see things like that will happen. But when you have this product and the market is just continuing to shrink down to zero, eventually you have to grapple with the fact that industry is going away, and it's time to diversify the economy and to look to new economic opportunities, which is what I think we should prioritize, what the Biden administration should prioritize. I think that's the more honest and compassionate way to grapple with this transition.
Mm-hmm. So being from Eastern Tennessee and now living in West Virginia, I know the issues that you have to face in terms of looking at someone who works in the coal industry and making these arguments, right? I'm from Eastern Kentucky, and I've felt the same pains that I'm sure you have when you have to have those kinds of conversations. So somebody asks, what happens to these workers? Do they maintain employment and receive training to work in the new clean energy factories? Often the political narrative is loss of jobs and a transition to clean energy. So overall, I'm wondering how you're combating this on the ground.
Well, that's real. And I just want to acknowledge that this, this transition away from coal, but also ultimately other fossil fuels, that the fear of folks losing their jobs and also the economic opportunities in their communities, that it's very real. And I have in no way want to minimize or sugarcoat that is a scary prospect in a lot of places. And I think that we can meet that challenge at the scale, in the richest country in the world, we could meet that challenge at the scale that is required if we made it a priority at the federal level. Now, nonprofits can do some things, and philanthropy can do some things, but ultimately, the entity that has the resources and the reach and the leadership that we need to really do this transition right is the federal government. There is a bill in Congress called the Reclaim Act that would release $1 billion from something called the Abandoned Mine Lands Fund, which is a fund the coal companies have been paying into. The money is sitting there. Congress has to approve it being released. So the bill would release $1 billion out of the Abandoned Mine Lands Fund for reclamation all across coal communities. That's an example of the kind of thing that we could be doing to put people back to work. There's millions of abandoned oil wells and fracking wells all around this country that we could put people to work reclaiming so that communities wouldn't be suffering from that pollution. And they're currently just venting huge amounts of global warming pollution, methane into the air. So there's a lot of work like that to be done, as well as opportunities in clean energy. A lot of the coal plants that have retired, I will note, the workers in those plants, there was a long enough window between the announcement and the retirement date for workers to actually retire or to be moved to other facilities, because these are big utilities with a huge workforce. And so while there have been some job losses at the power plants, it's been more concentrated in the coal mining communities. And that, I think, is something that requires a national response. And I think we owe it to these places. We've all benefited from the sacrifices that people have made in Appalachia for sacrificing their health and their lives and their safety so that we could all enjoy affordable electricity for a couple of generations. And now, as we move into this new clean energy economy, I think we owe it to those places to make sure they're not left behind and to help build a new economy that can sustain the next generations of folks who live there.
Mm-hmm. That's great. We have a really great initiative happening in Evansville called Black to Green, taking African-American employees of these industries, fossil fuel industries, and moving them into green and renewable energies, which is exciting, and by the NAACP. I'm another Indiana specific topic here that came up. Could you give us some information about how to deal with coal to diesel, which is an issue in Dale, Indiana? And also related to Indiana, how can we get Indiana focused on electric co-ops? Any advice about either of those topics?
Yes, and I would mention again Wendy Bredhold, who is our BREDHOLD. She's on Twitter, she's on Instagram. She's our Indiana Beyond Coal campaign director and is a great resource for this. I would say, in a nutshell, I'm not familiar. I know about the Indiana Coal to Diesel project, but it's distant enough in my memory, I don't remember the details. In general, those things have not panned out, again, because they're actually not that economic. There was one here in West Virginia that was just on the drawing board and keeps sort of flailing along because it's not, you're taking something that's kind of expensive and very polluting in a world where there's not really a market for that anymore. And so I'm sorry that I don't remember. I used to at one time actually know the details of that project and it slipped my mind, but I think the economics of those projects tend to be their Achilles heel. Mm-hmm. And then the electric co-ops really are a key focus for us in the Beyond Coal campaign right now, because they have been a little more insulated from some of these market pressures. And they also have had some incentives to keep their coal plants. The Rural Utilities Service has this loan program that has loaned a lot of money to these utilities to build coal plants that they're now saddled with. And if you think about a coal plant like your home mortgage, if you owe the bank money on your house, you can't just walk away from your house because you owe the bank money on your mortgage. And that a lot of these co-ops are in that same position, that they still owe money for these loans that they took out on these coal plants. And so we're pushing the Rural Utilities Service to kind of reconfigure their loan program so that the co-ops can pay off these loans faster and actually benefit their customers, benefit people's electricity bills because they're not paying forever on these big loans. So there's definitely work to do there, specifically around the co-ops for sure.
Great, thanks. Well, it's 1 o'clock, so I'm going to close it there, Marianne, although there were many other questions for you. This is exciting to have an opportunity to talk to you. You're so well informed and moving the needle here. Thank you so much for all the work that you do, and thank you for your time sharing about it today. We really appreciate it.
Well, it has been my pleasure, and thanks to all of you. I'm sure you're here because you care about these issues and you're trying to figure out what you can do. And the last thing I would say is Indiana is a really important state where we've actually had some of our most progressive utilities and some of our most backwards utilities all operating there at once. And we always need more folks to get involved. And the Sierra Club and our partner organizations exist to help plug you in. So if you want to do more, just please let us know.
Thank you. Everyone, thank you for joining us today. There will be a recording of this webinar on the ERI and IPE websites. Share it broadly. And please join us on March 19th for our next installment with Dr. Stuart Pickett, who will be talking about urban ecology and race issues. So thank you all. Have a great Friday and a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne. Bye-bye.